Hello everyone, welcome to your channel Maintenance Mechanics. Today we are gonna discuss about the bearing, basic concept of bearing familiarization. We can say that, as we all know, that bearing is a machine element that constant relative motion to only the desired motion and reduce friction between the moving parts. Bearing is a machine element that constant relative motion to the desired motion and reduce friction between moving parts. Means the bearing main function is to reduce the friction between moving parts and carried out transfer of motion and transmit forces may be radial force or axial force or combination of both the forces. Here we mainly discuss with different types of bearing. Only two types of bearing we will discuss: thick film lubrication bearing and rolling element bearing. Others bearing may be special types of bearing like magnetic bearing, aerostatic bearing, yarn bearing. We will discuss in other video all the special types of bearing. Here we only discuss thick film lubrication bearing and rolling element bearing. Thick film lubrication bearing, as the name suggested, thick film lubrication bearing. In thick film lubrication bearing, both the mating parts in bearing, rotation or moving parts and static parts, are separated by the thick film of lubrication, maybe hydraulic oil or lubrication oil, which is used we weight 220, weight 68. All this lubrication oil by different static and moving parts are separated. Hydrostatic bearing, in hydrostatic bearing, employ a positive pressure supply that maintains a clearance between rotating and stationary element. With the hydrostatically lubricated bearing, the lubrication is introduced under pressure between the moving surface. As in hydrostatic bearing, already said that positive pressure supply. Here positive pressure supply is by the other system, like we can say that positive pump use gear pump, vane pump. From that we provide the external pressure. Here the pressure is not generated inside the bearing, pressure is externally supplied. In hydrodynamic bearing, as the name means, hydrostatic. In hydrodynamic bearing, the gaps generated dynamically by the bearing motion. Hydrodynamic bearings are used in rotary application and may require external pressure on one of the bearing pads or secondary bearing to avoid excess friction when starting rotation. Hydrodynamic bearing can be designed for radial or thrust loaded. As here said that in rotary application we use hydrodynamic. Here in hydrostatic we can say that linear motion we can use hydrostatic bearing. Hydrostatic bearing mainly use machine tools like horizontal boring machine, plano-miller machine, heavy plano-miller machine. If you want to read about that, you can go to the website of one of the famous company, Waldrich, Germany, Waldrich Kobor company. We can go to the Skoda machine tools, and if you found that a Skoda machine tools, you can read manual. Hydrodynamic bearing, pressure generated, this is mainly used in rotary application, we can say that. But at starting in hydrodynamic bearing, in starting we require external pressure on the bearing pads or secondary bearing to avoid excess friction when starting rotation. This type of bearing, hydrodynamic bearing, used in turbine application, where at the starting of the turbine external forces, external pressure is required, and when the turbine gain the speed around as most of the turbine in India is running around 3000 rpm, at some rpm, then hydrodynamic bearing comes in function, and a squeezing and wedging action comes in play in hydrodynamic bearing. This is the mainly two types of thick film lubrication bearing. Next we are going to discuss on rolling element bearing. Rolling element bearing is mainly ball bearing and roller bearing. Ball bearing are mainly four types. We can add the deep groove ball bearing size like double row and different thing. but mainly four types: deep groove ball bearing, angular contact ball bearing, self-aligning ball bearing, thrust ball bearing. We will discuss details about the force and nomenclature in next upcoming video, upcoming slides. And roller bearing, cylindrical roller bearing, needle roller bearing, taper roller bearing, spherical roller bearing is mainly four types. Next come to the ball bearing, mainly ball bearing type. One thing I forgot to discuss about the rolling element bearing. Rolling element bearing mainly consists of four parts. One is inner ring. Sometimes in bearing inner ring is fixed, sometimes is inner ring rotating. Other is outer ring, rolling element like ball, roller and cage. Rolling element bearing is mainly consist of four parts. As inner ring, I discuss inner ring, outer ring, roller element like ball, roller and fourth element is cage. Case may be made of brass, PTFE as per requirement where the bearing is required. Some additional component is also bearing is provided like sails and some bearings having the special nomenclature like in outer ring it is provided for the lubrication groups. Ball bearing we are going to discuss in four types of ball bearing. Deep groove ball bearing. Deep groove ball bearing, the most used bearing are deep groove ball bearing. It takes maximum radial load and also absorb axial force in both direction. Deep groove ball bearing is maximum radial load. This is used for high speed with low torque transmission is required. As already first line is again most used bearing are deep groove ball bearing. In whenever you see the bearing in day-to-day life where you use it like fan, washing machine and bicycle, motorcycle, all is having maximum deep groove ball bearing. That's why this is mostly used bearing. Deep groove ball bearing mostly start with the nomenclature, start with the 6. Some examples are 6201, 6305, 6205. This is the mainly deep groove ball bearing. In also deep groove ball bearing 6263 is single row, but double row deep groove ball bearing start with 4205, 4305. Next is angular contact ball bearing. Angular contact ball bearing are characterized by a contact angle. That means that force is transferred from one raceway to the other at a particular angle. Here in angular contact bearing, ball having contact at inner race and outer race having some angle. Angular contact ball bearing are therefore suitable for combined loads where high axial force to be transmitted in addition to radial load. What is deep groove ball bearing is maximum radial load, but angular contact ball bearing high axial force be transferred in addition to radial load. Mostly I start with the single row angular contact ball bearing with 7 like 7305, 7304, 7205, 7305 like this. Double row angular contact ball bearing is started with the 3233, 3205, 3208, 3309 like this. 3308. Next is self-aligning ball bearing. As the name self-explanatory, that bearing is used where there is a misalignment, and that bearing can take the allowable amount of misalignment. Self-aligning ball bearing include a double row of ball. Double row ball is a double row in cage, guided by a cage and double row inner ring raceway. Double ring inner ring raceway, but having a special feature of a continuous spherical outer ring raceway, allowing the inner ball complement to swivel within the outer ring. That is why this is what enables a degree of self-alignment in application. This type of bearing is recommended when alignment of the shaft and the housing. I already discussed that alignment of the shaft and housing are a problem and the shaft could deflect. Self-aligning ball bearing are most able for observing radial force. Self-aligning ball bearing is mostly observed for radial force, as it is already declared that the shaft and housing are misalignment problem and may damage the shaft. So then in that case, what does the self-aligning ball bearing? They adjust around 1-2 degree as per the misalignment. Thrust bearing consists of two bearing dishes. somewhere something in thrust ball bearing, what we say that washer. In thrust ball bearing it is called washer, inner washer, outer washer, cage and bearing. Some people said okay with the inner ring and outer ring. Thrust ball bearing of two bearing with the raceway for the walls. Thrust ball bearing were developed solely for observing axial force. We can say that axial force is also thrust force in one direction, meaning they can locate the shaft axially in one direction. Self thrust bearing is start with the thrust bearing, which is start with the 5 to series 5208 5308. But when there is a ball thrust ball bearing, but thrust roller bearing, in that case thrust ball bearing start with the 8208 8205 82, start from 8. Next we go to the roller bearing. Cylindrical roller bearing use line contact between the rolling element and the raceway, which optimize the distribution of stress factor at the point of contact. This arrangement means that cylindrical roller bearing have a very high radial load. Depending on the design, they may also be transmit limited amount of axial load. Cylindrical roller bearing having high radial load and limited continuous. That's why cylindrical roller bearing is used where high radial loads like machine tools. Sometimes this is used in lathe machine, a spindle. This is used lathe machine, a spindle. Roller bearing. Next is needle roller bearing. Needle roller bearing are special type of cylindrical roller bearing which contains long and thin rolling element known as needle roller bearing. The ratio of diameter to length is between 1:3 and 1:10. 1:10 to 1:3 के बीच में. In between that, needle roller bearing have a high radial load rating and are only suitable for axial load, radial forces. If a space is constant, needle bearing can be a good solution. Okay, forget that. Needle roller bearing is mainly started with the like K, HK. Most common name is started with NUTR, NATR. This is the some example of needle roller bearing nomenclature. NATR, sometimes it is NUTR. This is the type nomenclature of needle roller bearing. Next we come to the taper roller bearing. This is also having taper raceway in the inner and outer rings with conical roller arrangement between them. Due to the contact angle, taper roller bearing can observe high radial and axial forces in one direction. Taper roller bearing are often combined in pair to support axial force in both direction. Taper roller bearing is mainly used in machine tools, a spindle, as I know. Machine tools, a spindle and a spindle support bearing, that is that is used in combination to support axial force in both direction. And taper roller bearing is usually start with the 302, 303, 313, 329, and they consist of 5 digit. Taper roller bearing is consist of 5 digit. What is it? As we already discussed, that angular contact ball bearing is also start with 32. Angular contact ball bearing 32, 33. But taper roller bearing is start with 302, 30, 33, 313, and this 302 after that 0203. This is 5 digit. Taper roller bearing is 5 digit, and angular contact ball bearing is 3205, 3305 is only 4 digit. That is the main difference between nomenclature of taper roller bearing and angular contact ball bearing. Last roller element bearing is a spherical roller bearing. A spherical roller bearing are very robust and work on the same principle as a self-leaning ball bearing, with the exception that they use a spherical roller like this. This is, we can say that this type of structure of the spherical roller bearing, like a spherical roller bearing like this, a spherical roller like this, and a spherical roller bearing is very robust and work on the same principle as self-lining bearing, with the exception that they use a spherical roller like this instead of ball roller, allowing higher load to support it. This can compensate for misalignment between shaft and housing. A spherical roller bearing is suitable for observing high radial load, moderate axial load. That's all about the familiarization of bearing, which is mainly used most of the bearing in our industry. A special bearing, yarn bearing, which combination of radial and axial load, and magnetic bearing and aerostatic bearing. We will discuss in a special bearing another video. In next video, we will discuss about the bearing designation. Next video, bearing designation. So if you like this video, like it, share with friends, and if any suggestion, suggest me in comment section. That's all. Thank you.